Damaged Defenders by Scherzab. Chapter 120. Magneto, Steve, and Loki. Magneto and his family had, in the days of the war, not been rounded up and sent to the camps until after Captain America had started stomping all over the continent in pursuit of Red Skull. Back then, Magneto had been young and unbroken enough to daydream, and he'd wondered more than once what it would be like to meet the man, to talk to him. Of course, imaginings aside, he had not truly believed that such a thing would actually happen, even in the brief period that Captain America had been active. After the man had gone down in the service of wiping Red Skull off the map, well, that he was meeting the man now, of all times, when the two of them were more or less on opposite sides. Not enemies, not yet, but close enough to be uncomfortable. After years of weathering Charles' disappointed looks and speeches, Magneto had thought himself immune to such castigation. Having a fresh-faced child, because all other things aside, the captain was roughly a quarter Magneto's age, take him to task should have been laughable. It should have been impossible to take him at all seriously. Yet somehow the disappointed glower on the captain's face left Magneto with the urge to apologize for his misbehavior and feeling vaguely ashamed of himself. In the vernacular of today's youth, what even? Caught unprepared, Magneto was willing to admit he reeled a bit under the captain's verbal assault, which he thought once he recovered somewhat had probably been the point, to put him on the back foot temporarily at least, and hopefully to keep him there. Such a tactic was hardly unexpected, simply the way the tactic had been carried out. Captain America, regardless of his not being in uniform, packed a rather unexpected wallop. Unfortunately for them, Magneto was made of sterner stuff. Yes, he'd been caught off guard, but he was hardly an untried, easily overawed youth. Magneto shook off the hit, then, giving credit where it was due, shot both men a look that said, "Well, Blade, I find myself curious. You say that Charles and I are both wrong. That large-scale application won't work. What initial solution?" Magneto asked, his tone implying, "Well, if you're so smart, what have you got?" Well, there went nothing, Steve thought. Steve shrugged. "I don't have one," he said. "I've only been, here for about half a year now. I'm still getting the lay of the land, so to speak. And the situation mutants find themselves in is rather complicated. To be honest, I don't think there's any single strategy that will work everywhere, which is part of the problem. Some folks, some nations, will respond to one method better than another. Trying to use the same tactic with everyone is going to backfire spectacularly, no matter what the tactic is. Except, of course, the whole defending the planet thing. That would work with pretty much everyone, especially once everyone figured out that they'd all be dead if it weren't for mutants kicking butt." But it was too early to tell Magneto that. "All I know is that hiding or pulling stunts like the one you did," and Steve couldn't have stopped the irritated, aggravated, disappointed glare he shot Magneto if he'd tried, "won't work. Not all mutants can hide, for one, and a lot of the ones who can wouldn't want to. Not to mention, none of you should have to just to survive." Steve's glower increased, but this time it got aimed to one side of Magneto, as this time it was aimed at not present idiots. "As for what you pulled," Steve snorted. What was it Rogue had told him Magneto said at one point? Oh, right. That whole, if I make them mutants, they'll be on our side. Nonsense. If you thought for 1 second that people forced to become something they hated and feared against their will would all of a sudden take mutants' side in world affairs? Steve shot Magneto a wide-eyed, scornful look that said, "I want some of what you were smoking." "I think I'm going to be a lot more worried about you than I started out being, but for entirely different reasons." Also known as, if you believe that stuff, you're insane, without actually coming right out and saying it. Loki was, again, trying very hard not to laugh or show his amusement. Truly, in so many ways, working with Steve was virtually identical to working with Thor, and yet at the same time, it couldn't be more different if they tried. Both men tended to prefer devastating blows with blunt weapons. Steven just tended to have better aim verbally than Thor ever would. Not to mention, Steven was better at strategy and tactics that did not include blunt instrument head bashing than Thor was at present. Much to Loki's amusement, there did seem to be more of have a chance that Thor would eventually learn that sort of strategy and tactics these days that he had credited Thor with previously. The big lummox finally seemed to be growing up a bit. Now, to the matters at hand. Haste and intemperance make fools of even the best of beings, Loki said. I know whereof I speak. Not so many months ago, I myself was driven to, shall we say it, less than well thought out action, and paid a horrific price for my folly. It is no easy thing to be faced with something that everything in you rails against, and yet not act rashly. Loki shot Magneto a honestly commiserating look, because he really did get it. He'd just been lucky to have Thor who would forgive him near anything. Not to mention the Avengers, most of whom had made poor decisions, many resulting in the death and or maiming of innocents, paid the price for them. They, as a result, understood and were merciful towards someone who had done the same and, like themselves, wished to forge a better path. Magneto, insofar as Loki knew, had only had Charles, who had a rather disturbingly Odin-esque air to him where certain matters were concerned. It certainly didn't help that Charles had been, like Thor, afforded every opportunity in life and had faced very little in the way of hardship. Charles, as a result, simply did not understand or believe that anyone could ever be in a situation where their only choices were morally ambiguous at best and driven by desperation and the need to survive at worst. There are other better ways, Loki said. Hard to think of in the moment, but I do hope that you are now past that moment. Said with that same air of, you're better than that, Loki had used earlier. Placation may not be possible, but another method does lie before all of mutant kind. It is perhaps distasteful, but needs must. And this method will at least provide mutant kind with a certain level of tolerance at the very least. Magneto was definitely seeing why these two men had been sent. The captain had all the subtlety of a runaway train, and to be honest, hit about as hard, both with words and looks. Loki, on the other hand, was far sneakier and more subtle. It made for a heck of a tag team. Still, again, Magneto wasn't some wet behind the ears child. He wasn't going to crumble so easily as this, especially when he had a good idea of where Loki was going with his other method to avoid mutants being slaughtered. Distasteful hardly even scratched the surface. It was his turn to glower now. Distasteful, he parroted, his voice vibrating with anger. I know what so-called method you speak of. You would have us beg. You would have us be beasts of burden and trained pets. You would have us trade our usefulness for the right to exist. And you call it distasteful. It is anathema. By the time he got to the end of the last sentence, it was taking everything he had not to stop around the cell, shout, and rage, or even physically attack the two of them. Or worse, call metal to him and strike them down. He was, by the end of his rant, shaking slightly with the effort it took to remain in control, to keep his voice relatively calm. He wasn't prepared for what got said next. Steve mentally whistled. Off the rails he might be, but Magneto was every bit as passionate about this, understandably, as Steve got about bullies. You're right, Steve said, and fought down the grin at Magneto's startle at the proclamation. It is anathema. Actually, it's worse than that. It's stupid and shouldn't be necessary at all. People should be better than that. Unfortunately, they're not, and we've got to work with the hand we're dealt. He sighed. The thing is, Mr. Lensher, that the whole mutant thing scares the pants off of a lot of people. Even mutants themselves, from what I understand. They don't know what the heck is going on, why people are changing, how they're suddenly able to do things that shouldn't be possible. Worse, some of the things mutants are capable of are utterly terrifying. Just to complicate the problem, scared people get stupid and do stupid things. People in general need to see that mutants and mutations can be something other than terrifying. Steve continued. I mean, they should be able to extrapolate. For goodness sake, it's pretty obvious that something like what you can do could save tens of thousands of lives if that ability was put to use, say, helping in the aftermath of earthquakes or other natural disasters that wreak havoc on cities and towns. It shouldn't need to be demonstrated, but Steve lifted his hands in a what can you do sort of expression. And before you say it, yes, I know, that sort of thing won't convince everyone. Steve sighed. There are some real pieces of work out there, and I know that. Then Steve leveled the look at Magneto. It was the look the Commandos had seen fairly frequently. A look of blazing righteous determination and a stubborn refusal to ever quit. It was, in point of fact, an expression that had inspired not just a nation to win a war, but people all over the globe to put their foot down and call bullshit on things they knew were wrong. "Them you leave to me," Steve growled, "because the one thing my press got right, I hate bullies. And yeah, you crossed the line into bully territory, but they took a flying leap over the line first. I will have absolutely no problem with calling every last one of them on their idiocy or stomping all over the ones that decide mutants aren't people and therefore can be tortured and experimented on with impunity." Yeah, that last one most sincerely pissed Steve off, and it showed in his voice. What had been done to James? That was completely, totally, and utterly horrifying, and if Steve ever found any of the people responsible, and I have a few friends who will be more than happy to help, Steve continued, some of whom have a personal stake in this because either they are mutants or they're friends with people who are. Well, calling Tony a friend might be stretching it a little bit for the moment. The two of them got along pretty well, but Steve wasn't quite sure if Tony considered him a friend yet. Steve still didn't know the details and wouldn't pry unless he had damn good reason to, but he'd gotten that Tony's life hadn't lent itself to allowing Tony to trust easily. That said, Tony was good friends with Warren Worthington, who was a mutant, and Steve couldn't imagine Tony tolerating Warren being labeled at best a second-class citizen or at worst a thing. Yeah, no, that would go over like a lead balloon. So Steve knew Tony would have no problem whatever with putting every scrap of money and influence he had into keeping mutants out of that kind of situation. Nor would he have a problem repulsoring people in the face if they decided to use mutants as test subjects for whatever twisted goal they had in mind. And that's the important thing. You're not fighting this alone. Not anymore. Charles? Steve made a face. Well, he does have his uses. He's good for teaching kids how to control what they can do, if nothing else. But as the leader for fighting for mutant rights, he was kind of useless. Mostly because Charles refused to fight. And Magneto was understandably on the panicky and flaily violent resolution side of things, desperate to not, have all of mutant kind wiped out, even temporarily. Because it was pretty clear to Steve that it would definitely be temporary. Whatever was causing mutants to come into existence, more and more were being born every day by otherwise totally normal people. So even if the current population got wiped out in another 15 or 20 years, there'd be another crop of them popping up. The point being, there wasn't anyone taking center stage for mutant rights in a way that wouldn't make things worse. I may not be a mutant, but I'm also not human normal, and let's be real here. Folks that are all up in arms about mutants would be all up in arms about someone like me too. So it's not like I don't have a stake in this fight. And honestly, even if I didn't, I still hate bullies. I'm not going to let this lie. Steve growled. All I need from you is to not make things worse. Steve sat back. I'm not asking you to agree to anything. Not right now. He indicated Loki and himself. We'll be coming by now and again. We'll talk more. Maybe in a few months or a year or whatever, you'll be convinced we're taking this seriously, doing something about it, and be okay with not causing a ruckus if you're ever released.